Willie Wonka and the Chocolate Factory was a movie released in 1971. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was a movie released in 2005. Ever since the latter came out, it has often been compared to the former, with the conclusion more often than not being that the classic is superior to its modern counterpart. I am the media dunce, so, naturally, I'm gonna argue the opposite. I actually prefer Charlie and the Chocolate Factory over its classic counterpart. Full disclosure, I am a millennial born in the first half of the 1990s, and thus have a bias towards modern movies over their classical counterparts they may have. For instance, I'm not ashamed to say that I prefer Chris Hemsworth's Red Dawn over the 1980s version, or that I prefer Mary Poppins Returns over Mary Poppins. Though it's been a while since I've seen the classic, I should probably rewatch it just to make sure. Anyway, back to chocolate. Here are the 7 major reasons why I think Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is a better movie. Number 1. Excitement. Both movies have scenes that correlate with each other, but are presented in vastly different styles. For instance, the opening scene. In Willy Wonka, we get treated to what I assume is a run-of-the-mill footage of the chocolate factory making chocolate. Contrast this to what we get in Charlie. One thing that drew me in the modern version, apart from the mysterious suspense in how these candy bars are made, is the music that accompanied it. Another place in the movie where I feel more excitement in Charlie than in Willy Wonka is the scene where the golden ticket winners arrive at the factory and Willy Wonka, in the classic, makes his first appearance. In the classic, you have your standard run-of-the-mill event. In the modern, you have a scene where Willy Wonka gives off the vibe of an overlord. I feel more suspense, and if I were one of the ticket winners, I would get a greater thrill walking forward than I would watching Wonka limp forward. Yes, it was an act that capped off with a well-executed tumble-salt, but it's over rather quickly. The final portion of the movies I want to focus on for this section of the video is the glass elevator scene, after the two Charlies have effectively run the tour. Specifically, I want to focus on the part after the elevators leave the factory. As a biased millennial, I prefer the version that delivers more excitement and suspense.
Yeah, look over here, Charlie. I think I see our house.
If you prefer the calmer, classic take on the scenes, that's perfectly fine. This video cannot objectively prove that the modern is better than the classic. My only goal is to express my own preference and maybe possibly reach out to those who also prefer the modern over the classic. Number 2. Visuals. I know that modern movies have an unfair advantage over older movies in this category, but I feel that classic movies have an unfair advantage over modern movies that I'll address in a later section of this video. So, I consider this to be fair game. Let's talk about the titular chocolate factory. In the classic, we see a standard run-of-the-mill factory. That's totally fine. The only problem is that in both movies, we get the impression that Willy Wonka is arguably the most famous man in the world. The entire world is invested in the hunt for his golden tickets, and as such, I assume that his factory supplies the world's chocolate. The modern factory gives me the impression that it is capable of doing just that. The classic factory, an argument can be made for the nation, but the world? I just don't see it. Inside the factory, we see a room where everything is supposedly edible. There are 2 things I want to do related to this room. One is contrast the chocolate waterfalls in this room. The modern chocolate river looks like it is made out of actual chocolate. The classic chocolate river, I don't want to say it's sewage, but whatever it is, it's not chocolate. The second thing I want to do is give credit to the classic film where it is due. Apart from that, I'll let the visuals speak for themselves. The final example I want to showcase is the lab. In the modern, the lab can logically call itself a lab, one where the
everlasting gobstopper
can be created. In the classic, that is just a junkyard masquerading as a lab. Number 3. Show versus tell. If you've studied film at all, or simply browsed the right places on YouTube long enough, you'll likely have come across the phrase show, don't tell. The idea behind it is that if there is a certain event that is relevant to the plot, don't just have the characters talk about it, but rather show the audiences glimpses of it. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, in my opinion, does a great job adhering to this principle. From the story of Willie Wonka's rise to fame and Grandpa Joe's employment under him, to the fate of the other contestants. Contrast this with how the classic handled that plot line.
My dear boy, I promise you they'll be quite all right.
Also, we even got to see where the Oompa-Loompas came from. Speaking of Oompa-Loompas, Number 4. Oompa-Loompas. In both movies, the non-Charlie contestants were knocked off the tour. After each such event occurs, the Oompa-Loompas would sing a song somewhat related to the contestant and their vices. In the classic, the song is mostly the same, with some of the contestants' lyrics swapped out a little.
Oompa-Loompa-Doompa-Dee-Doo, I've got another puzzle for you. Oompa-Loompa-Doompa-Dee-Dee, if you are wise, you'll listen to me.
The remake offers variety. They don't just provide different lyrics for the same song, they actively sing different songs, each with a distinct style.
Augustus Gloop, the great bakery evening comes. Listen close, listen hard, little Violet Beauregard.
Veruca Salt, the little brute, has just gone down the garbage chute.
The most important thing that we've ever learned, the most important thing we've learned as far as children are.
Number 5. Willy Wonka.
I know.
When people explain why the classic surpasses the remake, they often point to Willy Wonka as the reason why. But what if I told you that I actually prefer the modern Wonka? When he finally enters the narrative, he always struck me as a warm, comforting figure. The classic Wonka, though having his moments of glory, somewhat freaked me out. Bear in mind, he is the Candyman of the story, and as the classic movie went out of its way to remind us.
It's a Candyman.
This is a Candyman. This is a psychopath masquerading as a Candyman. Number 6. The contestants. As you know, there were 5 children who found the golden ticket. In justifying why I prefer the remake over the classic, I want to focus on 3 of them. First, I'll focus on Violet. This is a character where her vices need to be clear. Watching the classic, she may have a bit of pride, but it never struck me as crossing the line. When she blew into a blueberry, I felt that she was done dirty by Mr. Wonka. Hell, the fact that she lost before Veruca did, that's just wrong. In the remake, there was more to justify Violet's downfall, at least in the audience's view.
Because then I wouldn't be a champion. I'd be a loser, like you.
Her pride struck me as reaching the point of arrogance, meaning that when she becomes a much more impressive blueberry, I don't pity her quite as much, and in neither movie do I believe I'm supposed to. Plus, when I was younger, I sometimes lost track of the classic Violet and classic Veruca. That's not really a problem today, but even when I was younger, I could distinguish between modern Veruca and modern Violet. Veruca is someone whose vices are pretty blatant.
All right, where is it? Why haven't they found it? I want it now! What's the matter with those twats down there? Promised I'd have it the very first day! I want an Oompa-Loompa now!
Yes, I know she's a spoiled brat. I don't need to lose my hearing in the process of observing her character. In the remake, they managed to tone her down a bit while still making her vice clear. And because they toned her down, I was able to pick up on another character trait of hers, her love of animals.
Daddy, I want another pony.
As a result, I understand why the squirrel room was the room where her downfall would occur. She loves animals. There are squirrels working for Mr. Wonka. She wants them and is willing to break the rules in order to get them. In the classic, her freak out over the golden geese kind of comes out of nowhere. Why is this the room she goes crazy? And why is she willing to trash the whole place before going to get her goose?
I want works. I want the whole works. Presents and prizes and sweets and
Finally, I want to talk about Charlie himself. I can't really condemn either Charlie all that much. People might argue that modern Charlie is too clean and too pure. One might even call him a Charlie Sue. But his willingness to stand up to Willy Wonka towards the end does demonstrate that he does have character, and even serves as the catalyst for Willy Wonka confronting his own demons and fixing his own flaws. Classic Charlie, I can't condemn him too much, and he does have more character to him than modern Charlie does. But this one scene with his mom...
And after this contest is over, you'll be no different from the billions of others who didn't find one.
But I am different. I want it more than any of them.
does give me Veruca Salt vibes, and I don't think that's supposed to happen. Not to mention the scene exclusive to the classic where Grandpa Tro pressures Charlie to take some fizzy lifting drinks. This is a scene I'd like to skip, and I feel that this transgression is way worse than Violet's transgression in both movies. In the classic, I think Violet should be the winner. Come to think of it, who expects that chewing gum would turn you into a massive blueberry? If anything, that's an indictment of Willy Wonka, both versions, not Violet herself. At least in the modern, I feel that Charlie is the one most deserving of the prize, but in the classic, give the honor to Violet. Number 7. Classic versus remakes and sequels. Earlier, I conceded that the modern version had an unfair advantage in visuals, but countered it with some unfair advantage that the classic had over the modern. And this is what I like to call classic advantage. You might grow up with a movie and sometime later, a sequel or remake is released. Often, I would see people make the case that it can never top the original, and as a result, it never does, regardless of what the remake/sequel has to offer. And I think it's unfair to those who worked on the sequels and remakes. I've also seen how this can lead to newer movies being scrutinized in ways that older movies managed to escape, despite having similar flaws, and that their newer counterparts get pounded over. Take dialogue and tone in Star Wars.
I recognized your foul stench when I was brought on board.
Why you couldn't destroy me?
Good. Our first catch of the day.
Help! I think I'm melting. This is all your fault.
We did it!
I mean, Leia just had her home planet destroyed, yet it never struck me as bothering her all that much, at least as much as you'd think it would. Yet the prequels get pounded for clunky dialogue, and the most commonly cited example is ironically the one example that makes the most sense for the speaker.
I don't like sand.
Anakin has harbored a crush on Padme for 10 years, and was only recently able to talk to her. He doesn't have much practice from the Jedi Order, who taught him to suppress his emotions. He's not going to be Drake Bell. I mean, if I ever ran into my favorite actress and managed to have a conversation with her, the things I might say would make Anakin's
I don't like sand
line seem like a literary masterpiece. So the original trilogy gets a pass for things the prequels get pounded on. Similarly, Johnny Depp's version of Willy Wonka is often pounded for character traits such as...
Good morning, Starshine. The Earth says hello.
While Gene Wilder's Willy Wonka gets a pass for arguably worse character traits, such as...
If you want to view paradise...
So, if I might suggest, rather than watching a remake or sequel with the mindset of it can never top the original, try watching it with the mindset of it could surpass the original. If the remake does, great. If it doesn't, then the original has truly stood its ground, based off of its own merits rather than relying on its classic status as a crutch.